sport. Now it's time for today's perspective. And NASA is back in the business of sending people to the moon. That from the head of NASA, as 4 astronauts have blasted off aboard a massive rocket on a long anticipated journey around the moon. The first crewed lunar flyby in more than 50 years. The astronauts are said to be safe, secure and in great spirits. NASA teams and spectators were really ecstatic as that spacecraft ascended into the radiant sky atop a cascade of flames, paving the way for a planned actual moon landing in 2028. The crew, well, they have already been speaking from space. Let's hear from them.
It was an amazing ride uphill. The views, we've got 2 moon rises that we've had so far, and the views of planet Earth. We've circled it completely, and we forgot how beautiful it is to look down on Earth.
Yeah, that coming from the orbit of the spacecraft there, going right around the Earth. Well, joining us now is Olivier Sanguy. He's in charge of space news at the Cité de l'espace, or Space City, in Toulouse, in the south of France. He joins us now. Thanks very much for being with us on the programme. First of all, I mean, just a successful launch, a few little problems, but generally it seems to be going well.
Yes, all the problems have been resolved, NASA says, and for example, the toilets were not working, but now it's working, so all is going well.
Tell us what some of those problems were and why they may have been concerning.
Well, a 10-day trip without toilets is not something fun, although during the Apollo era that was done with bags. So it is not a showstopper if you want. There have been some transmission problems. Again, NASA says it's normal because they call it a test flight. They are going around the moon. They do not set foot on the moon. And what they want to do is to be sure that the Orion spacecraft with a European service model, this is very important, can do the travel to the moon and back.
So at the moment, though, they're going just around the Earth before they head off for the moon a little bit later. Is that right? Why do they do that first?
Being around the Earth is part of the test flight part. I would say they did a proximity maneuver with the second stage of the SLS. The goal was to do the same thing that Orion will do, to have a rendezvous with the lunar lander. So they did that around the Earth by security, and at the end of this day, they will do what they call a translunar injection. They will light the main engine of the European service model, and then they will go to the moon.
And that takes around 3 days, if I remember it correctly?
Yes, around 3-4 days. They will be near the moon on April 6th.
And what's the next stage of the trip, if you like, once they get there?
Well, in fact, it is a free return trajectory. That means that with the gravity of the moon, the spacecraft will go back to Earth naturally. Of course, there will be some trajectory corrections, but it is a free return to be safe. In the future mission, of course, they will circle the moon and have a rendezvous with the lander. But there it is quite a simple test flight. And to be sure that the Orion capsule can have 4 astronauts during 10 days, which is quite a challenge in the lunar environment. And after, they will go back to Earth, entering the Earth's atmosphere at a little around 40,000 kilometers.
As you say, it's a test flight. I mean, is there any other point to it other than just showing that the current technology is able to do this and everything runs smoothly?
Yes, they will rehearsal some safety procedures. For example, during the travel to the moon, they will rehearsal how they can be in the Orion spacecraft at a place where they are more shielded from radiation. Because what is important during moon mission is that you don't have the shelter of the Earth's magnetosphere, the magnetic field of Earth. So you have to have in the Orion capsule a place where you can be protected from some solar storms. They will rehearse that. They will do a lot of rehearsals to be sure that all the procedures to do future moon missions are okay.
Of course, man has actually been to the moon and landed on the moon before. Many of our audience will remember when it happened. Those who don't remember it because they weren't alive will have seen the pictures, of course, and know the famous story and the famous sayings and everything. I mean, why is this technologically wise so different? I mean, presumably technology has come a long way, but it still needs testing?
Yeah, that's an important question. Our visitors at the Cité de l'espace ask a lot about this. In fact, we are back to the moon, and NASA want to be back on the moon with a more sustainable way, meaning that at the Apollo program, for example, the lunar lander was expendable. What NASA wants in the future, not the very first lunar landings, I guess, they want that the lunar landing being reusable. And why? But because they want it cost less, because they want in 2032 to have a lunar base. And if at each time you waste the lunar lander, it's not budget-wise. So that is going to be the next big challenge of the return to the moon by NASA.
Sounds like the space shuttle. I mean, obviously not in exactly the same way, but the idea of being able to reuse the craft.
Yes, exactly. And maybe in the future, the rocket to go to the moon will be also a reusable one. The SLS, Space Launch System, the rocket you showed just a minute earlier, is not reusable. So it's a path to have more sustainable manned exploration or crewed, exploration to the moon. But it's very difficult task. Maybe in the future, the lunar lander will have its fuel from the exploitation of lunar resources on the very long term, of course.
What's the actual point of going to the moon? Is there any actual real scientific reason to go there?
There is a scientific reason, because the moon is a part of Earth after a collision of more than 4 billion years. So when you study the moon, you study the moon, of course, but you study Earth also. It's also a stepping stone to go to Mars after. We are going to do rehearsal of technologies that we need to go to Mars, but in 20 years or more, I don't know. And also, of course, there is a geopolitical interest. As you know, China wants to be on the moon by 2029. And in America, some politicians says it's not acceptable that China is on the moon before the United States can be back. So it's, it's space dominance. For the United States, you can be the first superpower if you are not first in space, and there are no second place.
Yeah, I mean, critics might say it's all just a big sort of PR exercise. You presumably would say, no, there's a lot more to it than that.
Of course, there's PR in space, there are geopolitics, but it's also a way to go further. It's a way to have new technologies that you could not do so quickly, because when you go to space, you face a very harsh environment. So you can be just good. You have to be the best in technology. So that's a way to have more technologies. Every day on Earth, we use space technology. For example, when we have a phone, we know where we are at a few meters, but it's a space technology because there are satellites that allow that.
So the race really on now against China to be able to get there first. I mean, presumably, what's your thoughts on that? I mean, will the US get there first?
Well, perhaps not, because the Chinese space program is more Apollo-like, more simple, if you want, in a way, because simple for the moon is not a good word, sorry. But what is interesting is that this race is on the American side. American politicians says we must be on the moon again before China is. But China never said they want to be on the moon before America is back. So you see, it's half a race in a sense.
Yeah, it could be very difficult if China does get there first, going back to that PR point of view. One other thought, I mean, you mentioned earlier on the idea of actually building a base on the moon. What would be the point of that?
Base on the moon, if you like, it's like a base in Antarctica. It's the best way to do science on the moon. But it's a huge, huge challenge. If you remember, at the beginning of the Artemis program, it was to do a space station around the moon. And now that have changed. And it's a bit of a problem, because the European Space Agency is a big partner in the Artemis program. And the European Space Agency was constructing modules for this space station around the moon. And now the plans have changed, and NASA wants a lunar base. So we are going to see how the cooperation will change about that.
Finally, Olivier, I mean, for a long time, space has taken a bit of a back seat, hasn't it? There haven't been a whole series of different missions. I mean, of course, there's been SpaceX as well, which has spurred a lot of interest. But generally, governments have been perhaps a little bit more reticent on spending money on space exploration. As somebody who's sort of really interested in this topic, I mean, presumably it must be a very exciting time watching all these different missions and these different programs, hopefully anyway, coming to fruition.
Yes, true. These are exciting times. Our visitors says us that every day, but it's also very challenging times because the way the private sector is doing with space is quite new. And about the money, it's not so much. You know, the $20 billion annual budget of NASA is only 0.6% of the federal budget of the United States. Only 0.6%. So
And just ending up, I've got to ask you about the picture behind you. Is that an image taken on the moon of the Earth from the moon?
it's a picture from Apollo 8 when you know the famous Earthrise, the Apollo capsule going around the moon, so the Earth rising from the moon. It is a perspective, of course, and they take this famous picture, and so that's why there is this picture behind me because it is a symbol of the lunar exploration.
If only you got a helmet on as well, we could have believed you were actually on the moon. Good to have you with us on the programme today. Thanks very much for joining us, Olivier Sanguy, there, who's in charge of space news at the Cité de l'Espace, or Space City in Toulouse in the south of France. Thanks very much.